I'm Richard Pyatt. Welcome back to the BC City Connection podcast. This is the official podcast of the city of Battle Creek, Michigan. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the structure of our city government, the city manager, the commission, etc., and what you can expect to see as it relates to that on the ballot in November. City manager Rebecca Fleury is here to make sure we're clear on all of that. Hello, Rebecca.
Good morning, Richard. I will do my best.
And we appreciate that. By the way, I should say officially here on the podcast, congratulations on your retirement announcement. And
Thank you.
perhaps this discussion today is a little bit more poignant, or we're taking a little bit extra notice, knowing that Rebecca's successor will be looking for that person in the coming weeks and months. At any rate, this is the city manager commission structure of government. What does that really mean?
Thanks. I appreciate it. It's more commonly known as the council manager form of government
Yeah.
but since we have a commission in Battle Creek, that's what we call it. And it really does, it is the form of government that recognizes that there are distinct roles between the elected body and the appointed manager. And so I'm thrilled to be able to talk about that because there are very distinct differences. Really, if you, in a nutshell, the elected body, they're the policy makers. And the city manager takes that policy and turns that into action, day-to-day action. Because really, as a city manager, your job is to manage the day-to-day operations of a full-service city in Battle Creek. And we take our direction from the elected body. So the manager is an appointed role in a council manager form of government. The city commission, as a body, appoints the city manager to carry out those daily operation activities, whereas they're the policy-making body. The city of Battle Creek is not really different than other council commission manager form of governments. We have two appointees in Battle Creek, the city manager and the city attorney. And so we'll set the city attorney side. We have a new city attorney as well. There's been some change, and change is coming. But it has been recognized nationally and internationally that communities that are the council manager form of government, because you have a professional manager watching over and managing the data operations, tend to do better than those who aren't. I am biased. I have always been a part of council manager forms of government because I'm very, very supportive and committed to the role of a government manager, a local government manager professional, because the role can be nonpartisan. You know, as a matter of fact, our professional code of ethics says we allow the elected body to certainly handle the whole the political component of their role, even though we have nonpartisan city commissioners in Battle Creek, and then it frees the city manager up to then support the internal team, all of the departments that we have, and helped be a liaison between the elected body and the staff to make sure things are getting done in the way that they would like it to be done from an elected body perspective. Battle Creek has 2-year terms. We have 9 city commissioners, 5 ward commissioners, and 4 at large, and one of those at large being a direct elect mayor. And each one of our commissioners, it's a 2-year term. There are no staggers. So every 2 years, all 9 are up for re-election, which is happening in November of this year.
All 9
Yes,
are
sir.
up for reelection. Wow. So that's a whole other subject, I suppose, at one time. But let's be clear, as you've begun to point out, the commissioners are elected by the citizens. The city manager is hired by the commission.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So your role is not one that the voters participate in the sense that there's an election like the mayor or the commission. Instead, they have I suppose, a peripheral role in that they have elected the commissioners, and then the commissioners carry that out. So, what you talked about being biased and liking this kind of relationship in terms of government management. Why is that?
Well, I think there are many reasons. Because I think a professional manager can utilize the skill set that of which they've been hired for. So that means managing the daily operations, making sure that we're efficient and effective, and that we're good stewards of taxpayer dollars. Ultimately, it's the city commission that appropriates the funds that we are given to use. But, in Michigan, the majority of the funds that we have to use and not to operate a city are taxpayer dollars. And those come with a lot of responsibility and some strings. And so, the commission is working on policy making and decisions while the manager and the team can be turning those into efficient operations, full service 24/7 operations, which is, I think, really important. I think the other thing I love to lift up is if you look nationally, communities that are run by professional managers have a higher bond rating. There's these little data points that I think can support that in their higher bond rating. They can move through things a little bit more efficiently. I always say I could never be an elected official. That is a role that somebody really has to make individually. It's a personal choice and decision. For me, it's much easier to be an appointed role because I can set the politics aside as a neutral party to help make sure that our operations and management are being handled to the best of our ability. Oftentimes when I'm talking to even young as junior high or high school students, or sometimes even undergrad or grad, what we say is if you're going to compare us to a business, then the city manager is like the CEO. And the board of directors or the shareholders is the elected body.
Mm-hmm.
And that sometimes is a little easier for people to kind of wrap their hands around as far as understanding the role, the two positions and the roles in which they serve.
Yeah, that's an interesting comparison because now I suppose generally speaking, a lot of us are more familiar with that interpretation than we might be talking about city managers and elected bodies. But we get it. Just for a second, if you would contrast that with another form of government, what's another way to do this?
I think the other another prominent form of government is strong mayor. So we could take a look at Lansing, Michigan. So Lansing has the strong mayor. So the mayor is elected by the people, and the mayor is also responsible for managing that political realm as well as the operations. Now, then that could take many forms. I guess I should have lifted up Detroit as well. Detroit is a strong mayor form of government. So we have several large cities with a strong mayor form of government, but you will usually see somewhere in that mix, whether it's a deputy that's been appointed by the mayor, or it can sometimes be an administrator appointed by the mayor, somebody who is responsible for, making sure that the daily operations are happening, with the direction and the vision that's provided by the elected body. So I would say the next relevant form, the next most popular, I should say, form of government is that strong mayor.
Yeah, and why isn't it that way here? Is it just easier with this kind of setup in a town our size?
Well, ultimately, that would have been decided by the people in Battle Creek at some point. That was put forward as a ballot initiative, or it was established right at the time a municipality is created. I can't tell you that I went all the way back, Richard, to figure out if that was a ballot in Battle Creek or if that was how they set the charter at the very beginning, which would not be uncommon either. But we're talking in the 1800s, so it would be very different than, let's say, a community that was established in the 60s. So for us, Battle Creek at some point made the decision that the council manager form of government was the right one. And oftentimes, that is a community decision because they have to, the community needs to decide, okay, who do we want to represent our interests? And then how do we want that managed? And how do you turn that into some sort of action? And, in this case, in Battle Creek, it's the council manager form of government.
Well, like the comparison you drew between a CEO and a board at a company, roles change, people change at that level, the commission level. You pointed out now all 9 commissioners are running. All 9 commissioners are up for reelection, and so there is the notion that it's possible, whatever that likelihood is, I imagine it's probably minute, but it's possible at some point for the whole commission to turn over at once. Does that make a city manager nervous, or maybe see challenges in that situation?
Absolutely. I absolutely. It is a little, a little nerve. It gives you pause when all nine are up for reelection because you're right. If you just simply looked at it in the purest form, all nine could be replaced. And then, we would have a brand new commission that is seated at the first meeting in December, and there will be a lot of learning. There will be a huge learning curve, assuming that they had never served as an elected body or elected official or a city commissioner in the past. I've been pretty fortunate over the last 10 years that, it's been relatively consistent. I think 2 terms ago was the largest turnover. We had 5 of the 9 turnover at that particular time, but it kind of ebbs and flows if you look historically at what Battle Creek has done. I remember, I think it was in either 2016 or 17, the commission established a blue ribbon committee to take a look at several things in relation to our form of government, and then in particularly commissioners. They looked at the terms because we have 2-year terms and everybody's up. They looked at a direct elect mayor. They looked at the number of commissioners we have. All of those things were discussed at the Blue Ribbon Committee level. And it's not that they hadn't discussed those before, but every few years it comes up, and it needs to be talked about in the community and by the current body. But in all instances, and I was fortunate to be a part of that process. And we heard a lot of, very interesting things. I mean, I think the community was like, we like the 2 years, no staggered. If we like them, we'll reelect them. And if we don't, we won't. I mean, it was very basic. But then they also really heavily debated how the mayor is selected. So prior to that time, the mayor was selected by the commissioners. So our charter indicates that we have a organizational meeting right after the election results have been certified. And at the organizational meeting, the commissioners would choose a mayor and a vice mayor. Well, it was determined that by a vote of the people that they would rather direct elect their mayor. And so now you have to, a candidate has to run for the role of mayor, but the vice mayor is then still chosen by the commissioners at the time that they're seated. So, we have that little nuance. And then I shared at the beginning, we have 5 ward commissioners. So when I say that, that means 5 commissioners specifically represent a geographical area of the city, and they're elected from that geographical area in the city. So each one of those, Ward 1 through 5, are ward. And then the at-large means that they are basically elected and represent the city as a whole. So that's why I say we have the 5 ward commissioners for Ward 3 being pretty much at large, and then a direct elect mayor. I think the one caveat I get asked a lot is if somebody runs for mayor and they don't win, are they a commissioner? Then the answer is no. If you run for mayor and you don't win, you aren't any member of the elected body. It would just be the mayor that was elected. This year, I think, different than any other year for me, like in my tenure, is we have several seats that are unopposed. So if I think about in November, so there is no one opposing the mayor. So Mayor Banky will be returning after the November election. And there are opponents in Ward 1, Ward 2, and Ward 3, but there are no opponents for Ward 4, Ward 5. So those incumbents are coming back. And then the at-large, we have 3 at-large seats because Commissioner Jake Smith is not rerunning. And so we have 3 vacant seats and 4 applicants. So, we will have some stability going into the next 2-year commission term, which I think is really helpful, because one of the big discussions around the 2-year term is they really are just getting the knowledge, understanding, and their feet under them, and they're already in their 2nd year. That's a huge learning curve, particularly for someone who's never held the position. So you think about, I just think I'm getting it the first year, at the end of the first year, and you are going into your 2nd year. And if you're going to run again, you're going to have to think about that whole reelection. I think that that's a really very tight learning curve. So having knowing now, because there are some seats unopposed, having some continuity in that, I think is really, really, really helpful for a city manager and staff, and I hope for the community. And we've just recently been talking about that in the city manager role as well. I know you kind of mentioned my retirement, but I just think there is huge value in having stability at the city manager role at that level, to help, guide those transitions every 2 years, but also give stability to the staff so that they don't think that everything is going to be changing every 2 years, that you can have some stability in the manager, to have stability in the city manager role is helpful for the entire organization, in my opinion.
Yeah, and we certainly talked about the notion of turning over the commission completely, but obviously there has to be a set of circumstances that lines that up. What you just outlined assures us that that won't be the case with some of those being unopposed, so they'll return and they will be that stability. I'm reminded of my days working in Kalamazoo, where they thought about this a lot too, and they ended up staggering the terms. They have fewer commissioners back then than Battle Creek does. They decided to elect the mayor separately. It was also a commission decision prior to that. So it seems like there are a lot of similarities if we look at that history, and I'm sure that it's nice to be able to look at other cities and look at what their challenges might have been. And you talked about the independent election of the mayor in Battle Creek as opposed to Lansing or Detroit. The day-to-day operations, obviously, of the city are not part of the mayor's role. It's the city manager's role as opposed to in those cities, which is a nice distinction to be able to make. You can sort of wrap your head around that pretty easily as to how this works. If we were to just for a second talk about your comment about stability in the city manager role, there certainly has been. You've been here, what, 8 years, I think it is.
10.
10? Has it been 10? How did 2 years go by since we talked about that the last time? I don't know. So 10. This is, I think, fairly unusual, isn't it? I mean, very often in city manager roles, it's they're working on a career trajectory. They're looking for the next bigger city to move to. You see that fairly often. That has not been the case for you.
No, not for me personally. You are correct, though. If you look nationally, the average tenure of a city manager is 3 to 5 years,
Yeah.
and which is really, I think is a shame, because it's a huge learning curve, and I'm still learning things 10 years later. However, I think Michigan has been really fortunate is we have managers that have been serving their communities for beyond that 3 to 5 year tenure or average, which I think has been a credit to communities who see and desire that. But sometimes that's just not necessarily the case. So, I see that kind of twofold based on your comment is, yes, a lot of times if you look at the traditional trajectory of a city manager, after you finish your grad program, your master's in public administration, you tend to come in as an assistant to, or some sort of a supporting role in a community, a deputy assistant, assistant to type role. And then, you make the decision of, okay, I'm ready for that next move, which is usually then a step out to a smaller community to take on the chief administrative role, or it's to that next size and then beyond. Not everybody is looking for that. I think for me, I mean, I started my local government career with the city of Kalamazoo and then moved through some smaller communities, Hastings and Middleville, before taking on the Battle Creek role. And so the paths have varied, but I think the desire to have continuity in that role, it exists. Right now, I think we're seeing a lot of different political ideologies come into play in various communities, which may or may not support that the premise of a good long tenure for a city manager is beneficial to a community. But ultimately, any of us who serve in the city manager role knows we are at the behest of the elected body, which are chosen by the community members. And so they have to make whatever they feel is in the best interest of their community going forward from a leadership perspective. And I certainly know, understand, and respect that.
Let's talk about the commission itself and why it's important, that body, those folks, and what they really do.
Yeah, that's great. I wanted to come back and say, so having 9 city commissioners is a bit high. That's not the average. It's usually 7 has been the average in Michigan. I often talk about the reason why Battle Creek has 9 is because when the city of Battle Creek and the township of Battle Creek merged, each body wanted to make sure that they had appropriate representation on the new body that would be serving the new geographically designed city of Battle Creek. And so originally when they combined, they were at 15. And I think that turned out to be quite a large number and maybe difficult. And so as the body started feeling more comfortable in their role as the kind of the newly defined city of Battle Creek, they landed on the 9. And really the commissioner's role is that they are representing the people in Battle Creek, the neighbors. If you're a ward commissioner, you absolutely know the geography in which you serve. If you're an at-large commissioner, you know your geography, but you know the composition and the demographics of the community that you serve. But ultimately, they have to serve the community as a body. They are, an elected body must serve and enact legislation together. And sometimes that can be hard, and sometimes that boards kind of mesh. And so it's just, I think that's kind of the unknown when you think about new leadership at the elected body level in Battle Creek every 2 years. But their role, is incredibly important because they are the representative of the people. And I know all 9 of our commissioners are out there. They're talking with their constituents. They're listening about what, they think is going well and what maybe not be going well. And bring that back to me, my office, and the team about ways that we should think differently or areas that we have improvement or, kudos at times as well. So, it's a tough role to be an elected official. The first part of their journey is ended. They had to go out and they had to achieve enough signatures to go on the ballot as a city commissioner candidate. And then all that comes with that, campaign finance, there's reporting, all of this must be transparent to the community in which they're running, and then ultimately gives us that list of candidates that appears on the ballot, which is now what we know we will see in the November election.
Yeah, and so I think what you might be saying is that if somebody is toying with the idea of maybe running for this kind of office, one needs to be prepared to be outward and active.
Yes, absolutely. I think even more so now, the expectation of just sheer transparency, and transparency for everything. What you think shouldn't be transparent, well, there may be people in the community that think that should be transparent. So, you do really want to go into running for an elected position eyes wide open. And oftentimes we see it helpful if you've served on like a city board or commission prior to running, because you kind of get your feet wet a little bit in governmental type structure. And it can help you determine whether or not you want to take that next step. I think a really good example I'd like to share is the city has what we call a youth advisory board, which was supposed to be a pipeline of young people who may think they would like to consider elected role or serving their community. They could get their hands wet. That youth advisory board is an arm of the commission, just of younger people. And it was always the goal when the youth advisory board was created decades ago, was hopefully to find the next city commissioners, to find the next city mayor, all of those things. And we actually saw that in play when Commissioner Janasia Morris was elected in Ward 2. She came from the Youth Advisory Board and was elected as our youngest city commissioner ever. And so I think she is a strong representation to young people in this community that think about serving your community, be a part of it. And I don't know how much more hands-on you could get than serving as either a youth advisory member or a member on a boards and committee, or someday eventually as a city commissioner. So, we try to create that pipeline from, boards and commissions, but ultimately we just want people to be involved in their government. That's what this is all about. We want you to know that what we're doing, we hope you see as in the best interest of you, and that you have a pathway to communicate what you think should and should not be happening through your elected body, and then ultimately to the administration.
And certainly there is information about those panels on the City of Battle Creek website. So all you have to do is look at the show notes for this episode, if you like, and click right on through, and you'll find information there about the available boards on which you could serve as a member of the community, and perhaps give that some thought. And if you are a younger person, maybe that particular panel that Rebecca refers to is one to consider. All right. So in November, we know what to expect now. City residents know at least what to expect as far as the totality of the commission and how this election might affect it. And certainly your respective wards will be represented on the ballot one way or another. And as it relates to the city manager situation, we'll be hearing more, I'm sure, in the coming weeks and months about the process to find Rebecca's successor. Rebecca Fleury, City Manager, Battle Creek, congratulations to you, and thank you for the perspective.
Thank you, Richard. I appreciate the time.